of selection, there were some where there was a 50% increase in oil and protein. And he thought he was really onto something. Now, he was getting tied up more and more into administration, and so he needed some help. He did get approval for an assistant. Hopkins was a chemist by training, so you tend to hire people in a discipline that you're familiar with. So he hired another chemist, a lot of analyses here in the oil and protein, and the chemist he hired was Mr. Edward East. East came on, took over the program, and started noticing, because he spent more time out there, that yeah, there was an increase in protein, increase in oil, but it looked like there was a decrease in vigor. And so in 1904, East took over the whole program, and he met with Jenkins, or met with Hopkins, and he said, you know what we ought to do? We ought to plant this stuff in near the road, rather than just plant it in mass like it was all together. Plant it near the road, differences were astounding.
What does that mean, I'm sorry?
It means that if you have an ear of corn, you shell some off, you identify that row came from this ear. Okay. The next row that was planted, different ear. Okay. So you really had the identity of the corn in every row rather than essentially broadcasting it. Okay? And when you do that, and you've been doing some self-pollination, the differences become very evident. So Hopkins was, East says, well, you know, this is sort of interesting. Hopkins came out. He was getting burdened with administration. And any researcher that gets burdened with administration, they tend to get grouchy. So he was out there and looking at the material, and it turned out that the ones that had the highest oil and the highest protein ended up being the puniest looking plants. Well, he spent about 8 or 9 years on this, and he said, no, we're not going to do any more. We're not going to do any more. Program is stopped. September 1st, East found himself without a job. But he had met the winter before the director of the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, Edward Jenkins. And they had hit it off, so he says, Jenkins, you know, I sort of need a job. He said, okay. Okay, yeah, come out here. I think that we can use you. So East went out and moved from the University of Illinois to the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. When he got there, realizing that he had already devoted about 8 years in selfing and handling material at the University of Illinois, he really didn't want to start over. So what he did is he talked to the associate that was storing the seed. And he says, you suppose you could get in there and give me remnant samples or sublots of about everything that we've ever done and catalog it in a way so that, that if you can send it to me, I'll know what it is. Sure, I can do that. It was done. It would not happen today. But it wasn't known how the seed was transferred until 41 years later, which is sort of an interesting story. Now Jenkins, the director of the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, sort of thought, well, there's something going on here. Let's see if we can't get this documented in some way. So he suggested to East, why don't you write a publication? So he said, okay, yeah, I can do that. So East wrote a publication. Now, this is how cagey these guys were. The publication was entitled, The Improvement of Corn in Connecticut. None of the work had been done in Connecticut, but it sure made everybody happy in Connecticut. It was acknowledged that it was the University of Illinois, but with Connecticut in the title, it had real local appeal. In that particular publication, he suggested the possible use of varietal hybrids, not hybrids from inbreds yet. In now we're up to about 1907. In 1907, East made hybrids, inbreds by inbreds, And an inbred is the end result of self-pollination 7 or 8 years. And it doesn't, it's really not pertinent on this one, this about this time. But there, you start with a variety like that, you self-pollinate it. Each one of those plants is from a different cycle of selection, so it took about 8 years to get to that one. So you cross 2 of those, that's inbred by inbred. Inbred by variety. Variety is an open pollinated variety that was commonly grown just by farmers at that time in the fields. And then varieties by varieties. He essentially made a lot of intercrosses. Good material out in 1908. In 1908, the national yield average was 26.9 bushels the acre. His highest yielding hybrid yielded 202 bushels to the acre. Now that gets anybody's attention. The best hybrid out-yielded the best variety by over 100 bushels to the acre. So he's been going along and he's been publishing, and he goes, and what happens next? What else can happen? Well, he's offered another job. This is cutting edge at the time. Harvard University. They want him to come and teach. Well, Jenkins, remember Jenkins? He's the cagey guy that got him and used Connecticut in the title of that first publication. He doesn't want to lose him. Something happened then, can't happen today. Jenkins says, well, why don't you take both jobs? You can teach in the late fall, winter, early spring at Harvard, do the field work here, and we'll, Connecticut, being good people that we are, we will hire a person to help you out. So he took both jobs. Now that was pretty sneaky. East hired a fellow by the name of Herbert Hayes. Herbert Hayes was working in 1911. Hayes and East published Inheritance and Maze. This established the importance of segregation in the breeding process. Now remember, it sounds old hat, you don't even think anything about it today, but back then, some of these terms hadn't even really been coined very well. And many things were determined. They also determined that that was an essential feature of Mendelism. Going back to the 1865 one, you had to get segregation to be able to identify the heritable units that you wanted to advance forward. So this has been a lot about breeding. 1912, we start getting involved with DeKalb County, Illinois. There was a practice in the late 1800s, early 1900s, of farmer institutes. And generally a group would come together. They would invite people of expertise to come and give advice. And it worked pretty well. But things were needed in northern Illinois, maybe more than some other areas. A dairy area needed alfalfa. People were having problems getting it established. So there was a group that met. And in 1912, a series of farmers, merchants, and bankers came up with $10,000 to start an association that would be a local, like Farmers Institute. The organization was called the DeKalb County Soil Improvement Association, because essentially one of the biggest things they had to do was show people how to lime to raise the pH to establish the alfalfa. They hired a gentleman by the name of Bill Eckert. He came in as really the first farm advisor. He immediately started looking for high quality alfalfa seed, sources of limestones, and he also wanted to get some things going, improving the quality of corn. Farmers at that time would save the best from the best, and we weren't able to reproduce everything we had, but essentially they put the piles of the good corn they had, thinking that that's the best they've got. Just like livestock, you breed the best with the best. They would shell some off, save it, and that's what they'd plant the next year. If they had a bad production year and a lot of ear molds, well, their quality was bad,